I've often consoled myself and other people by suggesting that there's more about God we don't know than we do know. And as I reflected on my own vocation story, I realized that's the case with me especially. Our variation of that might be, our God is a God of surprises. And I've been surprised quite a bit in my life. It started off back in, I guess it was 1944, when I was a kid at St. Patrick's School in East St. Louis, Illinois, and the associate pastor, Father O'Connell, was getting his doctorate at the time, and he used me as a guinea pig for his course in testing. It was a rather interesting experience. I got out of school, and I think I picked something up in those days about knowing about tests, you know, and it never hurts to be a little test savvy. And I remember one day especially, he asked me if I would be interested in going up to Belleville to the prep seminary and talking to the vocation director. I told him I would. And that the man we met at St. Henry's was Father Wittenbrink, the vocation director. And Father Wittenbrink asked me during the course of our conversation what kind of priest I wanted to be. And I said, what kinds of priests are there? He said, well, Father O'Connell is a diocesan priest, and I'm an oblate. And I immediately said, I want to be like Father O'Connell, which I suppose implied in hindsight that I didn't want to be like Father Wittenbrink. But Father Wittenbrink picked up on that later on, and he told me, he said, Singer, someday you'll come crawling to join us. I came up to St. Henry's, and there was a rivalry between the diocesan students and the oblate students, and I joined right in. And I razzed and rabbled on Father Wittenbrink, you know, you oblates and stuff like that. And he kept pushing. It was an interesting back and forth. And eventually, I think what helped change my mind was my experience during the summers in East St. Louis. I knew a couple of the priests, and I was not impressed by the life in the rectories in East St. Louis. Not that it was bad or anything like that, but the men just didn't seem happy. The pastor and the associate were kind of at rivalry. And so I thought, I don't know if I want to live that way. Then after I get ordained, I'd be sent out to, as you know, the Belleville Diocese is rather rural, and I'm not rural. And so I gave it some serious thought. And then what also triggered the difference for me was my experience of the oblates teaching at St. Henry's. They seemed like a very happy group of men. That there were about a dozen faculty members, and they took part in sports. They were bright men. They taught us well. Did all right in studies, but it was the application and the conduct where I had problems. Or rather, the faculty had problems with my application and conduct. In fact, the rector wrote a couple letters home to my parents. And the final threat was always expulsion if I didn't shape up. And I don't know if, well, I guess what really triggered it for me was I was diagnosed with mumps as a sophomore. And the doctor told me to go home because he didn't want me to infect the rest of the student body. And when I came to the front door of my home with my suitcase, Mom answered the door and she said, "Tom, did they kick you out?" I don't know if my mother was more concerned about the mumps or the expulsion, but anyhow, the orders were I was supposed to be quarantined for a few days, and I remember I'd sit there at home and I'd feel no mumps. And I called the doctor and he said, you'll start swelling pretty soon. Never happened. So we went to our own doctor and he poo-pooed the diagnosis of mumps. So I carried on, had a little vacation at home, and finally went back to school. And I don't know if my mom was more relieved about no mumps or no expulsion, but she was relieved. And then during my senior year, we got a new rector at St. Henry's, Father Miley, a very fine priest, intelligent, clever, funny, good preacher, and I was attracted towards his type. He was charismatic. And he was not easy though. He was challenging. In fact, the night before graduation, I remember we had a group of us went down to the bishop's house to pray the rosary with him on the radio, and I was the driver of the car, so we stopped by and got some ice cream, and Father Miley found out about it, and he challenged me. He said, "Did you come straight home?" And I said, "No." And so I said, "I didn't think it'd make any difference." Well, it made a big difference to me, you know, and he challenged me, and I kind of let it go, but I thought, well, you know, I don't know what's going to happen, but that was the kind of trouble I got into. But I made it through. And the talk after that was going to the novitiate. Novitiate is like a boot camp. It was up at Godfrey, Illinois. The big difference at novitiate was no smoking. In fact, that was probably the main issue of our year. I ought not to admit that, but it was a big issue. That plus where we would go for our theology studies. In those days, there was a glut of seminarians, and so they were sending us to 5 different places: San Antonio, Rome, Washington, D.C., Ottawa, and Battleford, Saskatchewan, out in Western Canada. However, by the time we finished our novitiate, 3 of those places were filled up or there were problems, and it was down to Ottawa and Battleford. And Ottawa, the language was French, and the atmosphere was rather rigid as I heard it. And so I kind of declared that if they want to send me to Ottawa, I don't think I'll take vows. God surprised me again. We weren't told where we were going to our major seminary until after we took vows. So I felt it would be a little out of order to take vows in the morning and then to disobey in the afternoon. So I went on to Ottawa. It was a tough year, challenging year. I'm glad I went. Again, God surprised me. And I think that's happened throughout my whole career as an oblate. I've had over a dozen obediences since I was ordained in 1957. And I can honestly say many of them were surprising for me. I did not expect them, but I accepted them and things worked out. So here I am in retirement. Maybe there'll be more surprises, we'll find out. But I'm grateful. God has been very good, very generous in his blessings towards me. I'm trying my best most of the time, and I hope that we continue the journey for a few more years.